Adam, let's kick things off here with this is something that is new news, but this is from a few years ago and whatever, but it is still news nonetheless.
It's fascinating news coming out of the LA Times, and a story that we actually covered a while ago. We discussed the federal bust of a major bookie ring that was based out of Southern California, run by a former minor league baseball player named Wayne Nix. And we've seen little details of this story come out over time. Yasiel Puig was caught up in this. A few other former minor leaguers who became bookies for Wayne Nix became caught up in this. But a lot of the details of this case were sealed up, and some great investigative reporting brought out the fact that a fairly major name was involved in betting on the NBA via this bookie ring, and that name is Maverick Carter, who is one of the business partners and one of the closest associates of LeBron James. Now, he was someone who talked to the feds during this investigation about having been a client of this bookie ring. He said he did not recall ever placing a bet on one of LeBron's games. That included the time that he was with the Lakers, or I should say covered the time that he was with the Lakers. And he also said that that he did not believe that anything had been affected, or anyone else had any knowledge of what he was doing. And the reason that I think this story is so important for us to talk about, beyond the obvious news value of one of LeBron James' closest associates playing these illegal NBA bets through a bookie, is for the crowd who likes to talk about sports betting as though it just started, and treating it like 2018 was the very first time that we had sports betting going on in the United States. And I think it's really important to remember that things like this have been going on for a very long time. We don't even know the full breadth of the Wayne Nix bookie ring, and that's just one bookie ring, as opposed to God only knows how many else have existed, maybe not at the scale and sophistication of this one, but they definitely have existed for a long time. And it's important to keep in mind that in this story, you can read a lot about the fact that Wayne Nix traveled in some circles in which Maverick Carter was not the only big name celebrity, the only big name NBA person that he was in the sphere of. Scottie Pippen is named in this story as someone who might or might not have placed a bet with Wayne Nix in the past. And we don't know the full scale of who was involved in it. But keep in mind here, we think the most important part of the story, or I'm not going to speak for Matt, but I think the most important part of the story is that we are talking about something that has gone on for a long time, and it is one of the main reasons that the regulated market has been advocated for by so many as a way to keep these things in the light, as the way to keep them more closely monitored, and so that you're not finding out about them from an investigative reporter who has good law enforcement sources, who happens to get inside a federal case, so that you're having things happen the way that they've happened with NBA suspensions, I should say with NFL suspensions, and other players and associates who have been caught in the regulated market, as opposed to us finding out about these things behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of the things that it also kind of brings to light two different things, that there are, one, the obvious need for regulation in all of these states across the country, because if not, the black market is just going to exist. But the other thing is that the black market still, Adam, will always have a place in all of this, right? I mean, there is a distinct advantage to the black market that is not available to, the legalized market, which is one, like we're talking about, it can kind of be hidden until you get caught, but I mean, it can kind of stay under the radar until someone gets finally caught and brought down. And then the other thing that we've talked about before, as well as the ability for them to operate and work on credit, right? And I mean, that's another thing too, with a guy, some of these guys that are betting high limits and stuff, like, yeah, they're not Venmoing back and forth, $1,000 every time. Like, that's not how this works. Like, they'll run up a number, and then when a settle number hits, then they're able to do, stuff like that. And those are other things that are the advantage there too. So we just have to continue to hone these laws, make these things more visible, make sure that everything is on the up and up, make sure that everybody has to, adhere to certain little things. I mean, we know this is different, right? I mean, this is now just a business associate, but Adam, we saw in the UFC, for example, we saw they had to not only outlaw fighters, but managers and coaches and everything as well, right? From betting on sports within the UFC, because again, inside information, they can know things, whatever. I do wonder how wide a net will eventually get cast in all this, whether it's like, hey, look, like, even if you are a close business associate, of whatever, like, I don't know exactly how they would even be able to regulate that and how they would be able to do it, but it is at least interesting to note, because if you don't think that Maverick Carter and LeBron talk about what's going on with LeBron's body and stuff and whatever and all of that, and when he may or may not sit and all, I mean, you're crazy, right? And so that's a whole new can of worms and a whole different thing here, but there's at least something to it, I believe.
Take that even farther. Even if Maverick Carter never placed a bet on a Lakers game, think of the web of associates that LeBron James has. Think of all the people in the league that he knows. Think of all the people that Maverick Carter knows. Think of all the people that Rich Paul knows. There's so much potential information that can be going back behind the scenes here. And it doesn't even have to end up with Maverick Carter winning a bunch of money. It's just the perception of these games potentially being rigged by people who are really tight with one of the most recognizable athletes in the world. It doesn't have to be at the level of LeBron James. It could be at any level, and it would still be the same kind of concern. I mean, I made a mess of explaining the story at the very beginning of this, but the ultimate point of the matter here is that we know that these sorts of operations have existed for a long time with the advantages that you just mentioned. And there is a concept out there, I think, that now that sports betting is legal, well, what's the big deal? Either you played with a bookie or you played with one of these legal sports books or whatever. No, the big deal is the transparency, or at least the perceived transparency of what goes on here. The idea is that the rules govern who can and can't. And as you mentioned, there is no specific rule currently that prevents Maverick Carter, someone who is a business associate, from being able to place bets on the NBA. However, there is a common sense thing in all of our heads that says you should not be able to place bets on the NBA. And obviously, Maverick Carter had some idea of that, because we're talking about wagers that were placed during the legal sports betting era, right? This is not something that happened prior to the availability of legal sports betting. We're talking about something that happened during the legal sports betting era. However, talking about someone who did it in a state that does not have legal sports betting available. So more and more, as we hear about stories of people who have been involved in gambling, it kind of works two angles for me, one positive and one negative. The negative is obviously that there is a perceived risk to integrity. The positive is highlighting for everyone who doubted that this has been going on for the longest of times, and that people who you wouldn't expect to be involved have been involved. Yeah, that needs to be highlighted, and that needs to be the motivator for change.
Side note, this just kind of brings up, there's actually a new show on Max, which is the streaming version of HBO and whatever and all that is, called Bookie, actually. And it is a bookie that is located in California. And they got someone, Adam, to, because a lot of times we get these gambling movies, and like this used to drive me crazy during the poker craze, because like there would be like these poker shows or poker movies, and like it was just completely inaccurate, and like stuff, they were having things happen that were just so crazy. And you're just like, why didn't you just talk to someone? There are so many people you could have talked to. They talked to somebody, like in this deal. Like there's, the guy is sitting here talking about gambling and saying, like, they're like, oh yeah, but legalized gambling is going to put you out of business. The guy's like, oh no, the tribes will never let that happen and whatever. And blah, blah. Like he's like literally talking about why his business in California, like, is he feels fine with it and will thrive or something. And it's interesting. So they talked to someone, because they were actually able to get like, a nugget that is true and inside information and all of that into this show. And I'm sitting there watching, I'm going like, golf clapping the producers right there. I'm like, hey, you talk to someone with an intelligent line in a drama, on HBO.
So you're telling me that Tilt on ESPN was wrong, that you're not able to go place a wager on your dad to lose a poker game at the sports book so that it balances out the losses that he just had? You're telling me that wasn't real?
Oh my! The worst show ever. I mean, I'm not kidding. The worst show ever produced ever on anything and all things gambling or whatever. But hey, look, if you have some time to kill, it's a free plug there on Max. It's called Bookie. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, it's just something to take a look at out there.